So, good evening and welcome. And after 2 weeks break, we're now in Parashat Vayechi. And Parashat Vayechi is, of course, the end of Bereshit. And it's Yaakov on his deathbed, gathering his children and giving blessings to all the 12 would-be tribes, following which he passes away. And at the end of the parasha, also Yosef passes away, and therein ends the story of Yosef, which is also the story of Genesis in general. And we say Chazak, Chazak, v'nitchazek, and we move on next week to Shmot. Also, this is our first week because of the break that we took. It's our first week of Chodesh Tevet, our first shiur of Chodesh Tevet. So we also want to talk about this month and the meanings of this month and its spiritual emphasis, or what is the work, the inner work of Chodesh Tevet. Now each Chodesh, each month in the Hebrew calendar, has a lot of different concepts and images and ideas that go along with it in Sefer Yetzirah. So according to Sefer Yetzirah, each month correlates to one of the tribes and correlates to one of 12 senses of the soul. According to Sefer Yetzirah, there are 12 senses, not 5 or 6, but 12. And it's not the regular kind of senses that we sense the world with. It's sense in the sense of, like in Hebrew we would say chush muzikali, like having a musical talent or intuition or a way of expressing. So the senses of Sefer Yetzirah are modes of expression, not so much impression, but expression. And so each month has a sense. So we can just name the list, such as people know, when you know the list. So we start with Nisan. So Nisan is the first sense. It's called the sense of speech. That's expression generally. And then Iyar is the sense of thought, and Sivan is the sense of walking, moving, and then Tammuz is the sense of seeing, but it's a different kind of seeing because it's not physical eyesight. And then Av is the sense of hearing, and Elul is the sense of rectification or action. And then Tishrei is the sense of touch, and Cheshvan is the sense of smell, and Kislev is the sense of sleep or dreaming, which is why we have so many dreams that we read about during Kislev. Tevet, this month, is the sense of anger. There's something called the sense of anger. How to rectify, there is a rectified kind of anger. There's negative anger, but there's also positive anger. And we have to learn to get a sense of which anger is the good one and which anger is the bad one. And then we can do what people call today anger management. The whole concept of anger management, the world is becoming more Hasidic as it progresses. So people used to talk about getting rid of anger. Now today people are talking about managing your anger. Just like you manage disputes, you don't solve disputes, you manage them, you work with them. So we can say this is the month of anger management, or of getting a sense of what the proper kind of anger is. And then just to finish the list, then Shvat is the sense of eating or the sense of taste. And finally, Adar is the sense of laughter, or a sense of humor. It has to do with Purim. So there are 12 senses and 12 tribes. The tribe of Tevet is Dan. The order of the tribes listed in Sefer Yetzirah, there are several ways to enumerate the tribes. The order they were born, and the order they were blessed, and it's different orders. But the order that correlates to the month is the order in which they travel in the desert and then camp. Seder HaChanaya. They camp in a sort of clockwise order, in a particular order, and then they also move in the same order. So then Dan, Shevet Dan, is the 10th tribe, corresponding to the 10th month, which is Tevet, 10th from Nisan, of course. And then also each month corresponds to a Hebrew letter. 12 out of the 22 have to do with the months of the year. So Tevet would be the letter Ayin, right? Ayin, of course, means eye with which we see. So we want to take all these information together, and although the parasha talks about all the tribes, and we have Yaakov blessing all of the tribes, each one in a different way, we're going to focus on the tribe and the blessing of Dan. Why? Because, like we said, Dan is the tribe of the month in which we read Parashat Vayechi. There's something about Dan that, when you look at it from this perspective of Sefer Yetzirah and this all these concepts being put together, that you realize that he's just one of the 12 tribes, but there's something special about him that we read all these blessings davka in his month, in the month of Tevet. So we're going to focus on Dan. Another reason to focus on Dan, which isn't arbitrary, is that later on, when Yaakov dies, he asks Yosef to be buried in Eretz Israel, in Ma'arat HaMachpelah, next to his forefathers. Avraham and Sarah are there, his parents Yitzchak and Rivka are there, and also Leah is there, although we were not told that she died, but she died, and she's also buried there, and there's one spot left for him, waiting for him, and he asks to be buried there. And then there's a whole story in the Midrash about what happens when they come there, in which suddenly the son of Dan becomes a very prominent figure. And we're going to tell this story later on in the Shiur. And this of course takes place in this parasha, and it appears in the Midrashim on this parasha. So two arrows sort of seem to point at the fact that something about Dan we can learn forever about all the blessings that Yaakov gives. They're all very interesting, but if you look at it from this perspective, for two reasons, Dan sticks out. It's his month, and his son, he has only one son, according to the list of names, and he becomes very prominent in the story of the burial of Yaakov. So two reasons.
And this one, sorry, because they camped in the month of Tevet, they camped in Dan?
No. When the Torah describes the journey of the tribes in the desert, then it tells that they were traveling in a certain order. Yehuda was the first tribe; he was the first to get up and go, and then there's a list of how they camped, and it's divided into really 4 groups of 3. So the first is the 3 led by Yehuda. He's Degel Machane Yehuda, and then there's Degel Machane Reuven, and Degel Machane Ephraim, and Degel Machane Dan, because Dan is the 10th, so it's the first of the last 3, 10, 11, 12. So, so we're going to look at all this and see what it means. But really the focus is the concept of anger, rogez. How to tell which rogez, which anger is negative and which anger is positive. So we're going to start, before we're going to Dan and what Dan can teach us, we're going to go into the very simple question, which is what is anger? And how can we talk about a positive kind of anger? What would be a positive kind of anger? Or several varieties of a positive kind of anger. But we're going to start with a negative one. Why? Because most sources we have, both in the Tanakh and in the Gemara, talk about negative anger, and they talk against anger. They say that anger is one of the worst things you can succumb to, and its results are also one of the worst things there are. So for example, in the Gemara it says that whenever you're angry, if you're wise, your wisdom is taken away from you. If you're a prophet, your prophecy is taken away from you. If you were destined for greatness, you would lose the greatness you were meant to have because of your anger. Very negative things. Another source says that when one is angry, one suffers, or one is ruled by all kinds of hell. Kol minei gehenom sholtim bo. There are all kinds of hell, at least 2. There's a fiery hell and then snowy hell. So you either become very cold or you become very hot, but you lose control. these two types or more types of hell rule over you. That's losing control. So anger is one of the worst things we know of. When people get angry, they could lose sight of who they are. They could behave in ways that it's not really them. It's their yetzer losing control. They lose the reins in which hold their deepest, most violent side. And if they lose control of that, it can be one of the worst things imaginable. People can be violent. People can be cruel. And people lose their rationality, they lose their choice. And also there's something about anger which doesn't have emunah, doesn't have faith. When you're angry at something, it means you, in that moment, that's another source. In the Zohar it says that being angry is like idol worship. Kol ha'ko'es ki'ilu oved avodah zarah. He who is angry, it's as if he's worshipping idols. Who's the idols that he's worshipping? Of course, himself. He's worshipping a certain image, a self-image that he has, in which he is meant to be treated in a certain way. Reality is supposed to treat him in a certain way, other people are supposed to treat him in a certain way, Hashem is supposed to treat him in a certain way, and if they don't, he has every right to be angry. And whereas, if you would have true emunah, and you would look at the world through the eyes of emunah, then you would see that even if people harm you, and even if reality harms you, which is really Hashem, it must mean that you deserve it in some way. And then you have, it was meant to happen. There's nothing happens by chance. And then you would ask yourself, what does this tell me about me? What does it tell me about what I have to rectify in my own life, in my own personality, in my own behavior? Even if someone is actually a rasha, a wicked man, and it hurts you, it does something bad to you, then you have to hold on to the belief that megalgelin chova al yedei chayav, that's how it's called, which means whenever someone wicked does something wicked, then he is wicked. He chose to do something bad. But the fact that that evil deed came down into the world was sent by Hashem. Hashem finds the right emissaries to do the bad things that he wants done in this world for various reasons in order to rectify people and places. He doesn't use a tzaddik to do this negative thing because that would force the tzaddik to do something bad. He marries a wicked man and to a certain situation. So if someone is meant to have someone, for some reason we cannot understand, he needs to have some of his property stolen from him because that's what he needs for his rectification. And there's another person that wants to steal something, then Hashem would put them together and he would make sure that the thief steals from the particular person that was meant to lose something. So, and if you hold on to that belief, then you're not angry at the thief anymore, and you realize that you have to look into yourself. And ask yourself, why did this happen to me? It doesn't mean the thief is not meant to be judged and maybe punished or whatever needs to happen, but that's not your job to take care of. You have to take care of dealing with the question, why did this happen to me? Why am I to learn from this? Or just to accept that you needed this kind of rectification to happen to you. He was before you. Yeah.
Couldn't your tikkun be the fact that you have to deal with the thief?
Yeah, that also. But there's two parts to this expression. Megalgelin chova al yedei chayav. Megalgelin chova means that the chova is the bad thing that happened, and megalgelin means it came from heaven. It descended from a certain purpose, and that's what you have to deal with within yourself. You know, when you ask yourself, why did this happen to me, and not direct all your frustration into being angry at that person, because that person was just a messenger. And the question is between yourself and Hashem, what's happening here? What are you trying to teach me, Hashem? And also, the second part is al yedei chayav, by someone wicked. So which means he also needs to be, and that could be part of your rectification, is to make this separation. So you need to be punished, but I'm not going to be angry at you, I'm just going to punish you. I can do it without any anger. And so anger really works without emunah. You lose emunah when you're angry. When you stop being, when you start having emunah, you stop being angry. On the other hand, after all this, we see some verses talking about positive anger, or talking positively about anger. And the main one is a line from the Zohar that says, in Aramaic it goes like this, it says, Itrugza de ikrei baruch and Itrugza de ikrei arur. There is an anger that is called cursed, which means it's a bad anger, but there's also an anger which is called blessed. There is an anger and there is an anger, Itrugza and Itrugza. There are two kinds of anger. The Zohar doesn't explain so much, but it tells us this very important sentence. So that's one thing. Another thing that we know from Kohelet is that he says, Tov kas mischok. Anger is better than laughter. And we can imagine that there is a positive kind of anger which is better than a negative kind of laughter. If someone makes fun of everything, someone is cynical, doesn't care about anything, and that's a very bad thing. And if someone else does care about something, and he may be angry about it because he cares. Anger is sometimes a sign of caring about things deeply, not being indifferent to things. If you care about something, you're angry at injustice, for example, so that would be a good thing. So there must be positive kinds of anger. Another verse in Tehillim says, Rigzu ve'al techetau. Be angry and you shall not sin. That's the most interesting one. So what does it mean, be angry? If I look at all the other sources, I think if I become angry, I become more sinful, not less sinful. So Chazal takes, so we'll start with this. So Chazal takes this verse, Rigzu ve'al techetau, be angry and you will not sin, and says, what kind of anger are we talking about? And then they say this, Le'olam yargiz adam yetzer hatov al yetzer hara. One should always take his good inclination and make it angry at the evil inclination. To stir a fight, but from the side of the positive inclination. Translated into our own words, what they're saying is, a positive kind of anger would be not to be angry at external reality or people or Hashem, but to convert the feeling of frustration and anger and just being this disorientation, which says something must be done, something must change, but to direct it into rectifying yourself. See what within yourself needs rectifying, what is still taken up by the evil inclination, what is still unrectified within yourself. And then if you vent or if you direct the anger into yourself, it becomes constructive. It doesn't become destructive. If you're still holding on to this image that I was supposed to have this and that kind of life, and I was supposed to be treated in this and that kind of way, and reality and other people didn't treat me the way I should, then you shout at everyone, you can burn the whole world, and you can burn yourself also along with it, because you become so frustrated and victimized. But if you direct this feeling of frustration to yourself, and then you can say, Rigzu ve'al techetau, you become angry at what is in need of rectification within yourself, and you use the opportunity of the angering incident in order to ask yourself what needs rectification within me, and then it becomes a platform for work, for progression, for evolution, for growth. So that would be the first thing. And then we can say that after that, and that goes with your question, so we can say, the Baal Shem Tov taught us that every process of growth goes through three major stages that are called submission, separation, and sweetening. And you need to have all three, and in that order, whenever you really work on something deeply. Submission means stopping and realizing what's going on from a faith point of view. And then separation is separating between two different ways of looking at it, usually one that's higher and one that's slower, and then going for the higher. And then sweetening is sort of rounding the whole thing up, usually in a way that sweetens whatever it is you were submissive, you submitted in the beginning. So in this case, we would say this, that something bad happens, then I feel angry, then I start by submission. Okay, this really came from Hashem, and maybe it was an act of God, nature, maybe it was someone else, but anyway, it's Hashem. So now I have to stop and stop the fire from spreading outside. There's no reason to be angry at the outside world because that's not the real cause. And then separation is separating the external event from the internal event, which is realizing what this is an opportunity for me to work on within myself. That would be the separation process. Sweetening is when I go back outside to fix reality, but not from an angry point of view, from a point of view in which I made the separation, I'm working on myself, but like you said, part of the tikkun is also to have put some better boundaries maybe on the outside, punish the wrongdoer, make sure it doesn't happen again, do all sorts of things. And then we can say that this is where the pasuk we said, Tov kas mischok, anger is better than laughter, because just being in the middle stage would say then you don't care about the world, you just care about fixing yourself. That's not good, that's apathetic. So you need to have also a different kind of anger that is just an anger of caring about the outside world and fixing that also. And here we have Chassidut coming in and taking this verse, Tov kas mischok, anger is better than laughter, and giving us a very deep understanding of how to do this. So whenever we have this mem, which says something is better than something else, right? The mem is like the word then, right? Tov kas mischok, anger is better than laughter. But this mem can also be seen as from, not just then. In Hebrew, mem is then and also from. So we can say that which anger is positive when we're going back to the outside world to fix it, the kind of anger that comes from laughter, meaning an anger which is only an act of anger, which is really sprouting from an inner sense of joy, of laughter, of taking things easy. Meaning the idea is...
A controlled burn?
It's not just a controlled burn, you're just putting on a face. Because if your child does something which is wrong, and you have to make sure that they realize it's wrong, you can't be all smiley about it. You have to say, don't touch the electrical socket, it's very dangerous, you should never do this again. And you're putting on an angry face. You're not really angry because there's no reason to be angry. He's just a child. He doesn't know what he's doing. Even if he broke your favorite teacup, then now you have to teach him to be more careful about your stuff. But there's no reason to be angry. And being angry, that's just your idolizing yourself in some way. But if you do this submission, separation, then the sweetening or the end of the process would be that you can tell him, you can also be angry at him, but without being internally angry. Internally, you're in a state of sha'ashua, inner amusement, inner calm, schok. So this schok would be this kind of, everything comes from Hashem. It's funny in a way that my favorite cup was broken. There's something funny about it. I worship this cup. There's something funny about it. Everything is everything is a game that we play with Hashem. So I'm joyful about it. I'm calm about it. But then I can also be angry on the outside because the world needs, borders and teaching and all this. So we have this process of working that takes you from a negative kind of external anger to an internal constructive anger to again an external anger, but which is really just a show you put on while inside being very calm and very emunadik about it, very faithful about it. And you need all three because you need to let go of the external world, of being angry at the external world. You need to go through this process of directing it into self-rectification, but then you also need to go back outside and have this kind of anger, again, this kind of caring deeply about the world and showing that you care about the world and being present regarding external reality. So we have this process. Now, we can say that all this process is, that all this is just one kind of anger. Why am I saying this? This is a kind of anger that you really think about and you work on. Everything we just said requires a lot of consciousness. None of it comes naturally, right? It may be second nature after a while if you practice doing this process. Of course, it will become more like second nature, hopefully. But it's second nature, it's not first nature, right? It's not something. So when we talk about the sense of anger, we can talk about, we can use this term in two ways. One is something you cultivate. That's what we just described. This is cultivating a proper kind of anger management, like we called it, separating the outside from the inside, going back to the outside in a better way and all this. But when we're talking about the tribe of Dan, and the story we want to tell about that has to do with this parasha, we're actually going to talk about two famous descendants of Dan, his son and the much later descendant who is Shimshon. And we're going to talk about them as examples, especially his son, of a different kind of anger which is more natural. So when we talk about the sense of anger, we can also talk about certain types of people, not necessarily everyone, but it's one tribe. Certain type of people whose natural anger is something that we can learn from.
In a good way. In a good way.
Yeah. It's not the anger we talked about. It could be that it's not absolutely pure because they're not good. They're not the types who would do this work of this conscious stopping and thinking and separating, and they work spontaneously. They have this spontaneous anger, and they work based on this anger. They operate based on this anger, but it's not a bad thing. So not everyone has this. Most people, when they do this, it's very, very bad. But there's a certain type of person, and you know, all the tribes should be inter-included. We should all include an element of each of the tribes, right? Just like the Kohen Gadol has all the gems from all the tribes on his chest plate. So there's something to be learned from tribe of Dan, that the tribe of Dan had this property of being angry not in a sophisticated, you know, result of inner work kind of way, but they had this natural anger, but there's something very holy about this. It's like, right, there's this holy wrath, right? This expression of holy wrath. There is such a thing. But we have to pinpoint it, exactly what it is and what it isn't.
In the Dan sense, like in the din of Hashem himself. Right?
Yeah, so Dan, even the word Dan has to do with judgment, right? And his blessing is Dan Yadin Amo. And he's likened to a snake also, a snake that bites the heel of the horse and makes the horseman falls off. So now, let's say a few things about Shevet Dan. What do we know about the tribe of Dan?
Super into Avodah Zarah. Super into Avodah Zarah.
Why?
Yeah.
They always had a history of always doing.
Later on.
Yeah.
But we should.
Even in the desert, they're in the back.
There it is. That's not Avodah Zarah. Hang on. So, the first thing we know is that there's a source that says that compares Davka, Dan, and Yehuda. So we're going to talk about Dan and Yehuda now. As they're a pair in many midrashim. Why? They say like this. They say that the greatest tribe was Yehuda and the lowest tribe was Dan. Chazal say this. What do they mean greatest? It's not a question of numbers. Yehuda was greatest in a sense. Well, what is Yehuda? So Yehuda is the kingly tribe. He started out as the fourth son. He became the elder or the leading son in Parashat Vayigash when he took responsibility over Binyamin. And he did tshuva, starting with Tamar, then with taking responsibility for Binyamin. And then he merits to be the leading tribe in the desert. And the kingly tribe, because David HaMelech comes from Yehuda. So Yehuda is the kingly tribe. We said before we have 12 sense of 12 months. So Yehuda would be Nisan, first month. What is the sense of Nisan? We said before? Speech. Why? A king is called a speaker in Chazal, Dabar. A leader, how does a leader lead? With his speech. There was this movie, The King's Speech. And he says, he has speeches, he makes speeches, he gives orders. He doesn't actually do physical things. He rules with his mouth. He speaks and people follow him, he convinces, he gives speeches and so on. So a king is a speaker. The tribe of Yehuda is a tribe of speakers, meaning they're a tribe of very sophisticated, intellectual, verbal people. So they're the greatest tribes in terms of, let's say, cultures, civilized. They're the most civilized, most sophisticated, kingly, noble, in a way, tribe. Dan is the opposite extreme. Dan is the simplest, most lowly tribe. That's how he's described in the Gemara. Another thing we know about him was that he was the biggest tribe. Take these two bits of information together, the lowest tribe and the biggest tribe, and you really have an image of what in Hebrew we call Amcha Yisrael, When we say Amcha, we mean Amma is simple people. It's like the bottom of the pyramid of the bottom of the pyramid is the lowest. The lowest level is the lowest one and the widest one. So if Shevet Dan is the lowest tribe and also the biggest tribe, it's like the basis of the pyramid.
Like public wrath. Like
something like that, yeah. So they have this kind of. They're simple people. They're not sophisticated. They're the very opposite of Yehuda, which means they're not verbal. If they speak, they may speak not so properly or highly. They speak in a simple way. When they write talkbacks, it would have, typos and spelling mistakes and a lot of, maybe exclamation marks. And that's the type of, yeah, they're simple people. Or negatively, you would say they're the mob, yeah? But that's a pejorative, right? That's the word, that's a pejorative term. But you can also think about it as, there's a nice expression in Hebrew, Amcha. Amcha just means your people. Amcha Yisrael. But we use it to talk about simple Jews, and we usually try to do it, that's the tradition at least, to do it in a kind way. You can look at them as a mob, or as very coarse people, but you can also look at them in a good way, with a good eye. So there's something I didn't say before, which is very important, and which we're going to need in the continuation. We didn't speak about the letter Ayin. And what I wanted to say, I forgot before, and now I have to add this in, that when we're talking about internalizing anger, before going back outside from a rectified perspective, but when we're talking about internalizing anger, it has to do with a very basic Hasidic idea, which talks about why, spiritually speaking, do we have two eyes? So physically we have it for depth vision. It's called stereoscopic vision. But spiritually is a different issue. So spiritually the idea goes like this, that the right eye is a chesed eye, which means it sees good things. And the left eye is a judgment eye, which means it sees both the good and the bad equally. It's very objective and judgmental. And it sees things as they are without without beautifying it or making it look better. And the idea goes like this. The idea is that the natural state of every human being is that we very easily direct our judgmental eye at other people and the chesed eye, the loving eye at ourselves, meaning we very easily justify ourselves. We say, no, we have hundreds of excuses for whatever bad thing we did. With children, you can see this very clearly. I said, no, I had reasons and I had this and that, but he was bad. And that's turning your judgmental eye against the other person, and your eye that's melamedet zchut, that becomes your, like attorney, or like your, how do you say sanegor?
Prosecutor?
No, prosecutor is kategor. Defender. So you become your own defender. And in Chassidut they say that they're rectifying your eyesight, your spiritual eyesight, means reversing those two eyes, turning both of them in the opposite direction. You should direct the positive eye, the good, the kind eye to other people, because you're not meant to rectify them or change them. You're just meant to look at what's good, always to lelamed zchut, to try and, how do you say lelamed zchut in English?
It means to teach, but I think it means assume in this case.
merit.
Assume merit?
Assume merit.
To assume merit. So you need to assume, regarding other people, you need to assume merit, because you never know what they're dealing with, what happened, why they were late, why they were bad. So assume merit, okay? But you do have to be critical of yourself. That's how you grow. Unless you're really depressed or fallen or whatever, then you also have to direct the positive eye at yourself to make yourself get up again. But normally speaking, you need to direct. So that has to do with these two eyes. It's going to be important later on. So the idea of anger, that's the connection between anger and the letter Ayin in the month of Tevet. Anger comes from directing the judgmental, critical eye at other people, and then I become angry at them and I become frustrated and nothing grows. To them, I echo back their negativity and they become more negative, and I become more victimized and nothing happens, nothing good happens. If I direct the critical eye towards myself and the positive eye towards them, then this is the internalizing of being angry at my own evil inclination or my own unrectified part, and then and then anger is rectified. Okay. Now we're going back to Yehuda and Dan. So Yehuda is the civilized, intellectual, elite tribe, and Dan is the Amcha Yisrael, the simple people. Yehuda would be the apex of the pyramid, and Dan would be the bottom of the pyramid. Now, when we're talking about the order of them traveling in the desert, we said that Dan isn't the 12th one, it's the 10th one. And he's really the leader of the final camp, right? It's 4 camps of 3 tribes each. Dan would be the leader of the last 3, and this is called the camp of Dan. And the camp of Dan is called the rear guard, ha-me'asef. Me'asef lekol hashvatim. Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about that. Me'asef, asafsuf is the pejorative word for mob. Asafsuf. But here, the positive is me'asef. I'm not the asafsuf, I'm the me'asef, I'm the rear guard. This I had to look up before preparing the class. Rear guard. Asafsuf. No, asafsuf, no. In the Torah it says that Machaneh Dan, the final 3 tribes, but they follow Dan, that's the me'asef lechol hashvatim. He's the rear guard. So, and the literal meaning is that he collects. What do they collect? They collect everything that the tribes moving forward forgot. They dropped because they're the last one. They're picking up that for everyone. Which is a very nice thing to look at. Yeah, they're picking things that people forget. They don't forget. They pick it up, and they care about the little things. Sometimes the elite groups don't care about little things, but the simple groups, the simple population, they do care about it. They pick up everything that everyone else forgot. That's a very beautiful image. And he said something which I never thought before, which is me'asef is the same root as a negative word, which is asafsuf. That's mob. Asafsuf. The rabble. The rabble.
Rabble, yeah, that's a good translation.
Yeah. So they're the opposite. Now, very interestingly, the Mishkan,
Watch that later.
the Mishkan is built by 2 people, Betzalel ben Uri, from the tribe of Yehuda, and Haliav ben Achisamach, from the tribe of Dan. We need these 2 extremes, the rear guard and the kingly tribe, working together to build the tabernacle. Same goes for building the temple. Temple was built by King Solomon from the tribe of Yehuda, and Hiram from the tribe of Dan. So both in the tabernacle and in the temple itself, you have 2 people from the opposite groups coming together. Why am I saying this? Because many times you see that the elite, the intellectual elite, who are, they write in the papers, they read the books, they read the poetry, they have a tendency to look down at the simple Jews, or the simple people, and to call them by the pejorative words like asafsuf. In the short history of the state of Israel, there were 2 incidents in which the left, a certain figure, a figure from the entertainment world, from the theater world, from the left, referred to the voters of the Likud, of the right, which is a very populist party, by a very pejorative term. So many years ago, one of them used the word chachchachim, which is like, hoodlums or something like this, something very. And then more recently, a few years ago, another actress said asafsuf, rabble. And in both states, then the Likud people will say, yeah, I'm a chachchach, yeah, I'm an asafsuf. You're just showing how snobbish you are, how arrogant you are. That's all you showed when you used that word. And then you had these stickers, I'm a proud rebel, and yes, asafsuf gay, you had these stickers everywhere. So these are 2 incidents of this example of the Yehuda type of people, because they're more eloquent, and because they're more sophisticated, and because they're more rational, and because they're more careful with their words and careful with their decisions. They look at the people who have a lot of anger. By the way, when something bad happens, like the simple people are going out protesting in the streets, maybe asking for revenge, and so on. And then the elite can't stand this, right? You had the same thing when a few years ago, when Obama the administration assassinated bin Laden. Most people in America came out to the street to celebrate. and because they remember 9/11 and they're still very angry. But then you had all these more sophisticated people say, how can you be happy?
No fair
It's just
trial.
another human being who died, and so on. And now, the story about Dan that illustrates in a very not easy to digest way, but we're going to have to abstract the message out of it, is a story of what happened during the burial of Yaakov. So the story goes like this. All the tribes are taking the body of Yaakov back to Eretz Israel, back to Hebron, to Marat HaMachpelah, and in order to bury him. All of a sudden, who shows up? Esav. Esav, he's still alive, shows up, the twin, the evil twin of Yaakov, and he says, this plot belongs to me. I'm the elder son, and also, he doesn't say this, but we know he was supposed to marry Leah. He wants to be buried next to Leah. Anyway, he says, this place is mine. It's, you can't bury Yaakov here. It's waiting for me for when I pass away. And then they tell him, but you sold the elder status for the red stew, for the bean stew. You sold it. And he says, prove it. I never sold it. Prove it. They said we have the bill. You have the contract that you sold, but it's in Egypt. He says, so yeah, so go get it. I can wait. Send someone. I have time. I'm not in a hurry. Go and get someone to send it. And then they're about to send Naphtali, who's the fastest runner. Now, when all this is taking place, this is of course something very embarrassing, very annoying. Esav is just being manipulative. He's just turning them all around and using this contractual gibberish, just to buy time. He knows that they're going to bring the contract. He knows that he sold the elder's status. And he's just buying time, which is never a good thing. If someone buys time, it means they're planning to do something worse. But they don't know what to say, so they're answering, and they say, and we can even imagine it's probably Yehuda there, because Yehuda is the eloquent one. So he's there dealing with Esav, probably. And then all this is taking place. Dan has a son. His name is Chushim. Chushim means senses, but it's a joke name because he's deaf. And so his one son, the son is deaf and dumb a little bit, maybe also like people before the invention of sign language. They weren't so sophisticated. They couldn't think even very properly because they couldn't have language. So he's deaf. He doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't hear all these legalistic talk about who sold who. Do you have the contract? You don't have the contract. Prove it. Show it. Bring it here. And he's saying, what's happening? Why are we not burying our grandfather? What's going on? And they tell him, so Esav is here, he's claiming that it's really his tomb, it's his grave site. And now we have to send someone to Egypt to bring the contract to prove that he sold it to Yaakov. And then Chushim says, and all this time, Saba, our grandfather, is going to lie here in contempt, outside, without being buried? I won't have this. And then he picks up a big stick or a sword, and he hits Esav on the head. And then you have two versions of what happens. One version is that the head, he decapitates Esav, and the head is cuts off from the body collapses, and the head rolls into the grave of Yaakov, and is still buried there to this day, which is a very interesting thing to think about. And the other concept, the other version, the more, horror movie kind of version, is that he hit him on the head and his two eyeballs sort of came out of his head and they rolled into the grave. Both versions, if you think about them, they symbolize something very similar. They symbolize their being. Esav is called Esav HaRasha, the wicked Esav. But he has holy sparks. That's why Yitzchak loved him so much. He has a very high soul. He has a soul, in Kabbalah it's called the soul of Tohu lights, very high lights. He has very divine high sparks, higher than Yaakov. We need to take the good sparks from Esav and to push away. So we take the head from the body, or the eyes. Eyes symbolize contemplation. Iyun comes from the word ayin. To contemplate is to to eyeball something. So taking whether it's the eyeballs or the head, it's taking the spiritual element, the contemplative element, the wisdom, the truth, the root soul, and taking it away from the whatever is negative. And that is buried in Me'arat HaMachpelah. We want it as part of the Jewish legacy. We want to take from Esav. The whole story of Yaakov is that he needs to grow and take all the lights of Esav and incorporate it into his vessels. So, and who's doing this? Who's doing this separation, taking the sparks, identifying what's a spark, what isn't? It's not Yehuda, the sophisticated tribe. It's not the verbal, cultural elite. It's the simple Jews. It's the simple people who say, well, you can talk all day about this, all these arguments for and against. We know the simple truth. We know that Yaakov, this is his grave, and he's just toying with us. And sometimes you have to be deaf to sophisticated talk in order to realize something very simple. It's a bit like the famous story about the emperor's new clothes. All the sophisticated people are pretending and then ignoring and sort of explaining away things they're looking at, whereas the simple child is able to point at the simple truth. And so the precursor of the emperor's new clothes little kid, who's shouting that the emperor is naked, is Hushim, the son of Dan, who's this deaf young man who says, don't you see what's happening? Stop all this talk. All this talk is just confusing or distracting you from realize that there's good and bad, and even within the bad there's good and bad, and we can separate it with one blow, so to speak. And this kind of how did you call it before, the masses' wrath,
Public wrath.
Public wrath, that's an expression, it's an idiom. Well, in the newspapers they say there's public wrath. Yeah.
Public outcry.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes this thing, it could be wrong, you know, sometimes people are misled, but it could also be very true. And that's the thing to listen to. So Yehuda doesn't need to totally look down or reject the simple, intuitive, instinctive sentiments that come from the simple people, because sometimes they could be seeing very simple truths that you, being overly sophisticated, you cannot realize. So I think this is an amazing, it's a violent image, it's a violent picture of this head being decapitated or whatever, the eyeballs coming out, whatever it is. But if you think about what it means and you abstract it from the details, then you see something very, very deep going on here. And of course, this all connects, we're talking about the two eyes we talked before, that you need this kind of, before we spoke about rectifying our eyesight in order to manage our anger in a good way. Now we're talking about someone who is intuitive about seeing injustice and rectifying injustice in a very spontaneous way. And by that he takes away the eyes also of Esav and sometimes and has them incorporated into Judaism, into our tradition, right? It's the sparks from Esav. Okay, so now we had this whole talk about this positive intellectualized anger, the work of anger. Then we have this intuitive kind of anger, and now we want to take all this, and we said that Yehuda, the kingly tribe, needs to learn something from Dan, and only together can they build the tabernacle and the temple. Then, in order to finish all this, sort of round this all off, we also have a very interesting allusion or a suggestion from all the different Midrashim and stories that the Mashiach himself, Mashiach is coming from David, which is coming from Yehuda, would need to have an element of Dan within him. Just like the two people building the tabernacle and the temple, it was two people. But the Mashiach has to be one person. But this one person should have an element of Dan. Where do we see this? We see this in David, which according to Kabbalah, David had beautiful eyes. He was red-headed, he was Yehuda, he was the kingly tribe. He had beautiful eyes. And the Kabbalah says something very weird when we start thinking about it, but it becomes more understandable when we think about it more, that his eyes were the reincarnated eyes of Shimshon. Shimshon HaGibor, Samson the hero from the tribe of Dan. And again, a very Dan type. He plays a game of riddles. They cheat him. He burns the city down. And everything, he's a very Dan sort of character, right? Again, it's the snake biting the horse, making the horse fall down. From a snake point of view, he's a very simple person. He's attracted to non-Jewish women. He has a lot of desires, but he's also very holy. He's also a Nazir with the long hair that was never cut off, and he's a very holy man, but also very coarse. But he's a messianic figure. In fact, Chushim is spelled without a vav. It's Chet Shin Yud Mem. It's the same letters as Mashiach. There's something messianic about Chushim. There's something messianic about Shimshon. And the Mashiach comes from David. We want the Mashiach to come from the elite. We want him to be a king. He needs to be very simple. He can't be like Shimshon and he can't be like Chushim, God forbid. But he needs an element of Chushim and an element of Shimshon. Chushim is a little bit of Mashiach. Shimshon, his eyes, he had the eyes, just like Chushim had the eyes, the perceptive eyes, to see something, see injustice and call it by its name and rectify it, even if in a very overly harsh way, but the sense is a very healthy sense. So Mashiach needs those eyes. So the idea goes like this. When Shimshon was finally caught, he told Delilah what his weakness is. She told the Philistines. They cut off his hair. They took him. They cut out his eyes. And they put him in their temple, and he was tied to the two pillars. And then he's sitting there and he's realizing that all this is his own fault. It's his own weaknesses, being attracted to women like Lila. It's his own weakness that he told her what his weak spot is. And he brought us all back on him. This is why, apart from judging the Philistines that they all deserve to die now, he's also judging that he deserves to die because he's going to kill himself, which is absolutely forbidden. But now it becomes an act of self-sacrifice in order to mut nafshi im plishtim, I shall die with the Philistines, because it's two kinds of anger we spoke about in the beginning, that you judge yourself and you also judge external reality, but from a point of view that I'm not angry at you, you did what you have to do, but now I have to do what I have to do. I have to punish you and I have to punish myself. And then it says something very interesting. It says, by doing this, Hashem, give me the power to pull these two pillars and to bring the building down on myself and all the Philistines here. And by this I will have vengeance for one of my eyes. Only one of them. And that's what he does. And it all collapses and it's a big victory, but of course he dies. Now we can ask, we spoke about two kinds of eyes. We have the judgmental eye and the good eye. The positive eye, the eye that looks at the good things. Which eye did he vindicate? Did he have vengeance for?
He died in the moment of judgment.
Exactly. It's very clear. It's a very violent, the whole story is very violent, it's very bad. He judged himself, he judged them. It was very, obviously it all comes. So, but now we have one eye that hasn't been avenged. Now, the word vengeance in Hebrew, nekama, everyone thinks about it, it has the same connotation as the English word revenge or vengeance. Very negative, violent, only talks about the bad. But literally, the word nekama comes from the word tkuma, which means to raise something that fell down, to rectify something. And in fact, you can find a place where Rashi says that nekama is just, it's both punishment and reward. Reward and punishment are both kinds of nekama. So most of the time we talk about the negative kind of the punishment. But a reward is also nekama in the sense that it puts things right, sets things right. So we can say that this kind of, Shimshon is called a tohu Mashiach, a chaos Mashiach, a chaotic primordial Mashiach. He has this primordial lights, but they're not in proper vessels yet. So his vengeance is a very violent one, and rightly so regarding everything considered. But the Mashiach, the real Mashiach, at the end of days, he according to, the Rambam says the Mashiach will win all the wars in the world. He will bring peace to the world by ending all the wars, by winning all the wars. But then Rabbi Nachman in Chassidut, and it's a very Chassidic outlook, he says, Mashiach will win all the wars without shooting one bullet.
Prayer.
He'll do it with beauty, with kindness, with grace. Everyone will fall in love with him. That's the kind of Mashiach we want. And the idea is this, that the Mashiach will need to have the strength, the vigor, the bravery of Dan, but his eyes, his beautiful eyes, right? David has beautiful eyes. David had, oh, by the way, had this balance because he was able to be very gentle when he studied Torah, just like a descendant of the tribe of Yehuda, Adin, but very tough when he was in battle, which is like this Dan property. Anyway, the last point is this, that the Mashiach will avenge the other eye, the good eye of Shimshon, meaning it will be, we spoke before about submission, separation, sweetening, it will be a sweet revenge in the sense that it will be, not in the sense that we usually think that a violent revenge is sweet because your anger is satisfied. That's a very negative kind of sweetness. But a sweet revenge would be a non-violent revenge. It would be a revenge that would be sweet, would be positive, it would be filling the world with kindness and beauty and good, and teaching Torah to the world. You are being sober. If a battle needs to be won, you'll win the battle. You have two eyes. But what you're really avenging now is the positive eye, the good eye. It means coming out of this situation in which we see the world as just made up of this anti-Semitic powers fighting against the Jewish people being, closed up within themselves. A messianic vision is we want to bring the light of Torah and Emunah and wisdom to the world. And for this you need a good eye. It needs to be the eye of Dan, but a good eye of Dan, which can be judging, but very in a kind way regarding the world and bring this to the world. So I think it's a very, very beautiful image of the kind of balances that the Mashiach would need to have. He would be from the tribe of Yehuda, he would have an element of Dan, but it would be a very sweetened element of Dan. It would come from the good eye of Shimshon, not from the bad eye of Shimshon. But it basically means he would be universal in his approach, and he would be judgmental of whatever is necessary, but in a very soft and kind and positive looking. But it wouldn't be like Chushim hitting Esav, it would be him converting Esav or teaching Esav. Hi, if you've gotten this far, you've probably enjoyed the class. If so, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Patreon is a platform designed to help independent creators receive financial support from their followers. These classes take time and effort to make, and any amount really helps. You can check out the link to my Patreon account in the description below.